Okay, well, hi everyone. I'm sorry for the delay. Thank you for coming. So we're going to talk about ableism in education. My name is Zaréma Bulgak. And before we get started, we're just going to see what ableism is. Like this, for sure, we're all on the same page. So ableism is the practices and dominant attitudes in a society that devalues and limit the potential of persons with disability. A set of practices and beliefs that assign inferior value to people who have developmental, emotional, physical, and psychiatric disabilities. So let's get started. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to start by presenting myself. Then we're going to talk about why disability rights and accessibility are important for every student. We're going to talk about the obstacles that students face with disabilities. We're going to see how intersectionality plays a role in all of this. We're going to talk about the obstacles when you have to defend your rights as a student, how to be an ally, and at the end, we're going to have a time to either discuss, either ask questions. So there's going to have a 10-minute breaks, 30 minutes into the presentation. So that's going to depend how much the discussions are going on. But they're going to have a 10-minute break, so don't worry about that. So don't hesitate to participate, ask questions, and if you're comfortable, you could also talk about your own experiences when you lived ableism in school or in universities. So when you go towards the bottom of your screen, there is an option to raise your hand. So if you want to talk, you could raise your hand and a moderator will unmute you, or you could just talk about it in the chat or in the Q&A. It's as you prefer. So, okay. So I'm going to present myself. My name is Zaréma Bulgak. I'm on the board of directors of Action des Femmes Handicapées Montréal. This is a feminist advocacy group for and by women with disabilities. So we give a space for these women to advocate and to have better life conditions. So yeah, I worked in many organizations for persons with disabilities. I worked a lot with adults having intellectual disabilities or adults on the autism spectrum. I'm a neurodiverse woman with an invisible disability. So my main disability is a language impairment. So it makes talking a little harder for me. And it makes also writing and reading, it could be sometimes harder for me. And I have attention deficit disorder, and I have a general and fine motor skills problem, but none of my disabilities are that visible. So that's why I say I have an invisible disability, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I'm currently doing my Bachelor of Social Work at McGill University, and I did a social services
Oh,
deck.
sorry.
Is everything okay?
Can you speak a bit slower? There's some messages in the chat. Can you speak a bit slower if possible?
Yes, no problem. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, so I did a social services deck at Cégep du Vieux-Montréal. Okay, so why are disability rights and accessibility so important for every student? Well, accessibility gives a space for humans to basically be humans. We're not always perfect. We can't always perform 100% of the time. And we need help sometimes, we need accommodation sometimes, and it's okay. Not everybody is able to be productive like this able-bodied society is asking us to be. It makes it easier for everyone. Nobody's going to complain if there is less stairs in a certain building. And also many people have certain difficulties without having a diagnosis. So like, I'm going to give an example. People who want to have a diagnosis, but they are on the waiting list to have access to a doctor. Well, you know, those waiting lists sometimes are very long. And if you don't want to be on the waiting list, you could just pay for a doctor, but not everybody has the money for that. So it makes it so complicated just to have a diagnosis. There's also people who don't fit into a certain label. They have certain difficulties or certain limitations, but they don't have enough of the criteria to be labeled as a certain disability. But that doesn't mean that these difficulties are not there anymore. There's also, for example, refugees who don't talk about their disability because they don't want it to affect their immigration status. So there's a bunch of situations where some people don't have the label of having a disability, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that these people don't deserve help, don't deserve accommodations, and don't deserve accessibility. So yeah, there's also the fact that people ask for accommodations all the time to extend your deadline for an assignment, or right now we all have the accommodation of not leaving our homes. So why is it a big deal when somebody with a disability asks those accommodations when it all the time happens for able-bodied students? And everyone will have a disability or limitation sometime in their life. Either it's due to an accident, you broke your leg one day, either it's due to sickness, either it's due to old age. We are all at a certain point gonna need accommodations or gonna need disability rights. So why not create a society where everyone can benefit no matter where you are in your life? Okay, so now we're going to talk about the obstacles that students with disabilities face. We're going to talk about assumptions, isolation, absences or being late, accessibility, and I also want to let you know that there's a big physical, mental, and emotional load when it comes to having a disability and having to study with all these obstacles. So there's so much more. It's so tiring. It's so tiring. Okay, so we're going to talk about the assumptions that other students might have on us. So we could hear, oh, the person's not good enough, the person's slowing down in our teamwork, the person's less smart. That's something I heard often when I had more difficulties talking as a child. The person's annoying because they need so many accommodations, and that's so annoying. Accommodations is a privilege and it's not fair. For example, when you hear a student having extra time on an exam, sometimes you can hear that. We cannot count on them. There's a bunch of assumptions that we hear. Are there any other assumptions that all of you could think of? I'm going to let a little moment for the chat to answer. And I'm going to be asking a bunch of questions like that throughout my presentation. So really don't hesitate to participate. They are irresponsible. They don't care. Yes, we hear that. Somebody's saying, finally, someone from Cégep du Vieux-Montréal. Yeah, we are amazing, huh? It's a nice Cégep. I love it there. Okay, it's not fair because other students without disabilities are also struggling. Yeah, we hear that too. Okay, I'm gonna move on, but if ever you want other assumptions, you could always write it down and I could read it later. Can't be held to the same standards. Oh yeah, we hear that too, huh? They're using disability as an excuse. Oh, and that often happened with my invisible disability. Yeah, okay, so you get it. There's a bunch of assumptions about us, which is really sad, but yeah. Okay. And I also realized, I was talking about this with my friends, there are different assumptions depending on the disability. So there are visible disabilities where these people tend to have infantilization, being treated like a child. Also, these people tend to be perceived as asexual, and school is not only school, there's a whole social aspect to it. So it's normal wanting to make friends, wanting to date, and wanting to get yourself out there. It's part of school life. So when you're perceived as asexual, automatically, that affects that. You're seen as only a victim instead of being seen as a person with weaknesses and strengths. So it's like people always pity you. So yeah, also imposed help. People believe that you really need help. And when they tell you, oh no, it's okay, I don't need help, able-bodied students sometimes don't listen. So they go out of their way to help the person, even if the person doesn't want any help and is able to do things on their own. And also, these people can't easily hide their disability to avoid these assumptions. So yeah, this is really sad. Whenever I don't want to face ableism, or whenever I don't want to have other students having these assumptions, I just don't talk about my disability. But I realize that not everybody has that same privilege as me. So yeah, and there's also invisible disabilities, minimizing or not acknowledging our difficulties. I'm gonna give an example. I had a French literature class, and I was talking to the professor that I was stressed about having to read so many books, and for me, reading is not that fun, it's very difficult for me. And the professor literally answered, oh, well, you just don't like reading because you haven't read the right book. But would you say to a person who can't walk, oh, you don't enjoy jogging just because you didn't jog in the right park? That's like, it's a little ridiculous. So I think it's like kind of a lack of understanding towards invisible disabilities. I also feel sometimes we have a lack of representation. We always imagine the person with a physical disability. And also we're seen as lazy or less smart. We were talking about it earlier in the chat, so yeah. Okay, so another obstacle that students with disability face is isolation. Often students with disabilities, they have to sit in front of the classroom, and we all know in front of the classroom, not many people go there, and I am myself like this. I prefer sitting in the back of the classroom. But at the same time, it's very heavy on a person's shoulders having to sit in front alone of a classroom all the time. So yeah, and a lot of people don't necessarily think about it. Hey, my friend has to sit in front of the classroom. I'm gonna join her, even if I don't like it, you know? So yeah, other students are often uncomfortable going towards students with disabilities. I realized that by talking to one of my friends. She didn't need a cane when she was younger, so she would have friends and everything. And as soon as she started using a cane, people didn't approach her anymore. So that was a very like big aspect that I did not even imagine, and it's very sad. Students often refuse to team up with someone who has a disability because of all the assumptions. I'm often scared of that factor. Social activities are not accessible or not adapted. For example, there's an end of the semester party. Well, if the party is at an apartment with stairs, well, that person with a disability is automatically excluded by all the end of the semester parties. So it's kind of, so it affects a lot the social aspect of the student with a disability. And also, depending on the disability, it can be difficult for some students to approach others. So not everybody is able to just go up and walk towards a group of people to make friends. Or for example, in my case with a language impairment, it's a little difficult for me to understand what is being said when so many people are talking at the same time. So I can't go to a group of people and add to the conversation because it's difficult for me to understand. So yeah, so have you experienced any of these obstacles, and are there any obstacles that you would like to share? So I'm gonna go in the Q&A. That's where people seem to be writing their answers. Okay, so probably it takes a little time to type this. Oh, somebody's typing. Use a cane, have to sit in front of the class, so I'm usually taking out automatically. My obstacles are mostly with the SID. Oh yeah, the SID and CGIPs, Disability Services in College in French, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's like a systematic obstacles when it comes to having accommodations, right? Yeah. If ever you want to elaborate on that later on, there's gonna have a slide where you could elaborate on that, because I didn't mention the SAID, but I'm gonna let you a little space for you to talk about that. They're using, oh no, that we read it. Oh yeah, there's also the fact that sometimes people don't understand you with an accent. So that's another issue, yeah. Mm. Oh, there's also somebody who said that students with disabilities are not helpful as an assumption. So that I did not see it earlier on. So yeah. Okay, so if ever you're typing something and I don't have time to answer, just like write a little word for me to know what you're talking about, like assumption, isolation, etc., and I could read it out like later on. Definitely felt that in my master's program with regards to, Oh my God, so many people answering. Okay, with regards to a fellow student with anxiety who receive occasional accommodations and a lot of hostility from other students who antagonize them. So like that person felt all the time the pressure from other students being antagonized. Oh, the gender neutral bathrooms are the same as disabled ones. That's a good point. That's a good point. I am all for gender neutral bathrooms, but at the same time, it is problematic when everybody uses them, even non-gender neutral people. So these bathrooms are always used, yeah. Okay. I hate having to write exams in a separate room because I miss the comments the teachers give during the actual class. That's so true. Yes, that's so true. So yeah, miscues, misunderstandings. Okay. Okay, so I'll keep on going, but like I'm so happy so many of you are participating. This is really fun because I feel like we're doing this together. I'm not the expert giving you all the info. You guys are the experts also because you all lived through this also. So I love it. I love it. Okay. So there are some students with disabilities that would often be absent or late, and it's not their fault. So often they get judged about that. Some disabilities require a lot of medical appointments, and they sometimes have health problems related to their disabilities, so they can't always show up to class. There's also maintenance and reparation of mobility aids, and not even just mobility aids. For example, a guide dog needs to go to the vet. Well, that's like an example of somebody who just can't show up to class that day. Adapted transportation can be late or canceled. That could happen during snowstorms or a bunch of reasons. Difficulties getting to classes without snow removal. I'm thinking of, for example, McGill campus where I am right now. It is so big, you need to walk 15 minutes from going to one class to the other sometimes. And already it's difficult if you do not walk, but imagine if you have difficulties walking and there wasn't any snow removals the next day of a snowstorm. Well, it's difficult to get by. And there's also non-accessible classrooms or buildings. So my question is, have you experienced any of these obstacles and how did these obstacles affect you? So for example, if you needed to be absent or if you were late because of lack of accessibility, how did the teachers treat you? How did other students treat you? How did it affect your learning? Did you miss important subjects? What happened? What happened concerning that? Okay, there's something in the Q&A. Okay, I was in the hospital. I missed the final exam and the teacher said that I would anyways fail and that I missed too much of the class due to my disability. Okay, so you had to like often be absent and it wasn't your fault, so the teacher didn't want to accommodate you. That's rough. That's really rough. I get really anxious about being late, so it's just me feeling super stressed and everyone else being fine with it. Yeah, I get that. A lot of anxiety comes from the fact that you really don't want to be late. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'll go to the next one. Write absences. If you didn't finish typing your answer, write absences and I'll read it out. Okay, so accessibility. There's accessibility issues in school, of course. So there's non-accessible rooms. For example, there are stairs to get to the entrance of a building, or there's not enough space in a room to be able to circulate when you need space. Professors don't always want to give accommodations. This often happens to invisible disabilities, but it also happens to like visible ones, sadly. Classes are not adapted. We often hear about the professor who doesn't want to give their PowerPoints before the class because they want people to show up. And if I give the PowerPoints, nobody's going to come to my class. But what about the person who needs their PowerPoint to be able to see because they have a special software on their computer? Or for example, me, who have trouble taking notes, well, it would be cool to have my PowerPoint beforehand to be able to just write my notes on the PowerPoint. It's going to be less difficult, you know? So yeah, there's also field placements that are not adapted. I have, for example, not one example, I heard this many times, sadly, people who finish all of their studies and they end up at their last field placement, and their last field placement is not accessible or it's not adapted. They don't take that into consideration. So they fail their field placement and too bad, you're never gonna graduate. And this is really horrible. I have an example of somebody, I heard a story of someone who couldn't see, and their last field placement didn't take that into consideration. So when he failed his last field placement, he finally was able to do another one and everything was okay, but it's still another obstacle that able-bodied students don't necessarily have to face, doing a field placement 2 times and having to fight for your right to have like your diploma at the end, you know? So yeah, social activities are not adapted or not accessible, of course. So we talked about, like, for example, the end of the semester party. So what accessibility issues have you encountered in school, and what should have been done differently? Okay, so one person talked about disability service cannot force a teacher to accommodate. Yeah, and I think it depends also where you are. I know Cégep du Vieux-Montréal, they were a lot more on your side when stuff like that happened, while McGill, it's the professor. Like, if the professor doesn't want to, the Office for Students with Disabilities can't necessarily go against the professor, and I think that's an issue with many universities. But yeah, but I know that this happened also in CGIPS. So when we have group work time, the room gets really noisy and I struggle to focus. Yes, people who have ADHD, ADD, people who can't hear as well as others, this is a big problem. Yeah, people who chat instead of actually working. Okay, something was on the chat. Some teachers doesn't want to share his PowerPoint, and it's really hard when you have a visual impairment. I tried to understand what he said in class, but he referred to the PowerPoint as much and doesn't read it. Oh, so like, for example, teachers who are like, okay, so this is written on the PowerPoint, so I'm just gonna skip this, and everybody got it because they can see the PowerPoint, but not everybody can see the PowerPoint. So it's so frustrating, yeah. Okay. Professor with a physical disability here. Okay. You'd be surprised of the difficulties to find classroom accessibles for instructors. There are always a step at the front. So even if you are a professor, you still have this accessibility issue. So imagine for students, it's horrible. Second language classes in college, example, English at Cégep du Vieux-Montréal is overwhelming and I'm having a lot of meltdowns. I'm really sorry that like a second language class is very difficult. You write good English, so at least there's that, but like, I'm sorry that the classroom can be adapted to having a good learning space for you. Was told they cannot give preferential treatment. That happened when you needed accommodation. Somebody said you can't have preferential treatment. Uh, that goes back a little bit to the assumptions, huh? It's yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna go to the next one. I'm so happy you are participating. I think it's so interesting what you all have to say. So what are the obstacles students with disabilities face? We talked about them, but there are so many obstacles. So are there any kind of other obstacles you experience that you would like to talk about? And what can be done to reduce these obstacles? So I know like one person was talking about SAID, the services to help students with disabilities in Francophone CEGEPs. So if ever you want to elaborate on that, because I didn't address it that much. Okay. Yeah, okay, write the comments in the Q&A section because otherwise I have to go between the Q&A and chat, and this is a little more difficult. Yeah. Okay, asking for clarity on assignments and then being told it is obvious and it would be a waste to explain again. Yeah, because the professor assumes that you're able to understand instructions as easily as everyone, but not everybody's able to. It's really ableist, assuming that everybody can understand on the same rhythm, the same ways. That's so true, yeah. Okay, during coronavirus, without access to the library, quiet study space, and library books, I had a lot of trouble writing my essay, so I just took the pass-fail option. At least you have the pass-fail option. That I'm so happy that at least we have that option at, I know McGill University has it. So yeah, but yeah, not everybody has a quiet home, huh? Yeah,
Oh,
I'm lucky about that, but yeah.
we have a raised hand, so we're just going to take a question from
Yeah,
Michelle.
perfect. I can't see Michelle. Is that normal?
Can you see the ASL interpreter?
I could see the interpreter.
So I'm just going to tell you about my school experience. Can you see me okay? Good. Okay. Just wanted to make sure you see me. In my entire school history, 20 years ago, to get a BA and everything, I'm trying to remember what that all looks like. Obviously, that was 20 years ago. I don't remember everything. But I remember it was really hard to ask for accessibility, for a note read typer, someone to take notes and everything. It was more, I had to do a lot of extra work myself just to chase down these accommodations. I had to ask a lot of people, so it was just a lot of extra work. And so now we will be taking, internet courses. I'll be doing that on the internet. I'm going to. And that provides another barrier.
Really? Okay.
Yes, because it's a course for Oracle. Oh yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, it's an online course. I'm so sorry. I missed that spelling. Sorry. It's an online course. It's sorry, not an internet course. It's an online course. And that was an interpreter error there. Can you see me clear? Yeah, my box is small. It's a little bit hard to see you. Am I able to let me pin her. Yeah, I'm gonna pin your, yeah. I apologize, everyone.
It's okay. Good job for the interpreters, by the way.
Now I can see you better. Okay, now she can see me better. There's a lot of squinting. Okay, great. So now that I'm going to be taking this online course, I have to do that again, work really hard. And there's a big barrier that I'd like to share. I have to think about what we're going to do in terms of if it's a Zoom meeting maybe with the interpreter there. How will they be able to send me the notes or the movies? Will the movies have captions?
Oh, yeah.
So compared to being in the classroom, the way I've experienced, asking for accommodations, asking for those things, I went through all that. But now online, I have to rediscover how to ask for accommodations, what those are. Listen, I need captions on the movies. If the meeting has audio with various people talking at the same time, how do we get the interpreter integrated? So it's like a whole new challenge to figure that out.
Yeah.
And how I'm going to be able to knock down those barriers all by myself, it's going to be a lot of work. So I'm just thinking through that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that it's same for many of you. There's new barriers that are coming up because of this. And maybe we're already tired of demanding it and now we have to do it all over again. But sometimes we find little successes in that, and that helps us to keep going and keep fighting. So that's it. That's what I wanted to share. I'll turn it back to you.
No, but it's really nice. I like the end of your message. There's little successes in that, but You are not alone. You are not alone. It is true. The person was talking about how difficult it was just to get the accommodation. So a lot of people fear your way. And of course, online platforms makes new accommodations and we don't really know how to navigate that yet. So I feel for you. I understand. Yes. So I'm
We
gonna
have,
go.
oh,
Oh, there's another person who wants to talk? Okay,
yes.
let's
Okay.
do that.
All right, Fawn, let me know if it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yes, it's okay. I've got my screen back.
Is the person, Edgar, are you able to?
I only see Michelle and Zaréma. I only see the two of
The
them.
person requested their microphone be enabled, so it should be on. You can ask your question.
Does it work?
Yeah, it does. I hear you.
Okay. So first of all, thank you for allowing me to speak. My question is like mostly, it's not a question. It's more about like a follow-up on what you talked, since I also went to CVM, and it's like kind of hellish for disabled folks there. Since the side, basically disability services for colleges in French, is so not accessible. You need to open your, Zarina, can you tell me what a dossier is in English?
A file?
Yes,
Yeah, a
you need
file.
to open a file with them. For that, you need diagnosis clearly stated on a page from a doctor or a higher professional.
Yeah.
So a social worker wouldn't work. So you need that. You need to open it. It can take some time for that because you need to meet the person in person. Then they open the file and you meet someone, which is a counselor in special needs, which is another story. And then they ask you about your needs. But the thing is, most of those services are not known by the student body and disabled folks in the school. So sometimes you find on your accessibility sheet that the disability service have in their files, you find that there is a lot of little boxes that could have been checked to have more services to accommodate yourself more, but they didn't check it because they didn't think you would need it. However, if you want those boxes checked to have the services, you need to fight for your rights, which is what I've been doing for them for the past 4 years. And they keep patting themselves in the back because it's one of the biggest side in Quebec, or the biggest, I'm not sure, because they are the ones that started it. So they keep patting themselves in the back and saying, oh, we are so good. But as a matter of fact, they could really need some help from the community. And it's really sad because I spent 4 years there and I was not able to change the way they handle the bloody elevator keys, which is something that sounds ridiculous, but at CVM, there is 2 elevators. When I first started there, both elevators were unlocked. It was set on them priority to staff and the people who use a mobility aid or disabled folks.
Yeah.
However, now it's not there. Now they took both of the stickers out, so you cannot see that. They left the tinier elevator for regular use for people who want it, and the CVM is 11 floors. So usually the people who are in the arts program with like a lot of things to have, like canvases and brushes, paints, etc., they use it to go up to the 11th floors. My problem with that is, for folks who have an invisible disability like mine, who are not diagnosed yet use a mobility aid, you cannot have the one with the elevator key, which is the bigger one. I was told by staff that this is ridiculous, that I should be able to have a key, yet I have had no like comeback from that. So I'm just gonna guess that it's gonna be like that at my new college too, which is tinier, which is Maisonneuve. So they have an elevator, but everything is like super old. Thank you for the person who wrote CVM égale Cégep du Montréal. Yes.
Yeah, we used to say CVM. Huh? Yeah.
Yes. But yes, so it's quite ridiculous to see that you need to have certain accommodations and they're not even met within the disability services. And I was wondering if you had like any tips on how to navigate that, because you went there. So I don't know if you had that help, or like how to make sure that we have our needs
Yeah.
met. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm gonna try to think of the tips because honestly, I'm a little bit in your situation. Like I'm a student who was at CVM and at McGill right now, and I'm trying to have all my needs met also. And I'm like in the same boat as all of you. And I was also a counselor at Cégep du Vieux-Montréal, and you're not the only person with a disability who came to me and saying, hey, I have problems with these elevators. I can't have access to the elevators, and so many able-bodied students are using them, and you're not the only person. And I think that because it's an institution, they have a very strict way of doing, but that strict way of doing makes people fall into the cracks. They don't have everything. And you were talking about the fact that you had an invisible disability, right? So anyways, I think you said you had an invisible disability. That's another obstacle. So people are not going to think of the fact that you need that. And because the information is not out there, you can't necessarily know and judge for yourself. And often you have to justify why you need things. That is a little ridiculous. Like for example, me with a language impairment, I had to practice before my meeting. Okay, how do I justify I need these accommodations? And which is kind of, yeah, it's kind of hard. So I don't have any tips for you because I am in the same boat. The only tips I have is really like advocacy and doing collective stuff. If you're still at Cégep du Vieux-Montréal or if you're at Maisonneuve, try to raise awareness about ableism and try to do the collective advocacy stuff, because I think that's what's going to change the laws. That's what's going to change the services and all of that. I'm just going to check. So yeah, okay. So somebody's saying I should like, I should give a break soon. I'm just trying to see the Q&A again. I'll go through the Q&A quick. Then we're gonna take a 10-minute break. So I'm gonna just finish this. 3 hours classes are too long. Yeah, it is. Not everybody can focus. I had a similar experience, and thankfully the nurse I had filing out my medical forms just said, okay, I'll check yes to everything. That is an amazing nurse. I'm so happy that you got that, because not everybody is so generous like that. What I perceive is that many professors and teaching assistants need literacy on universal design for instruction. Many professors don't know how to make PowerPoints accessible, for example. Yeah, not only professors, many people, I think, don't know how to make PowerPoints accessible. And yeah, and also disabilities are so different. So it's kind of, yeah, there is some universal accessibility, but sometimes it's scary because probably you're leaving somebody out that would have a certain accommodation or a certain need and you're not answering. Okay, so, oh yeah, there's one person who wrote in the chat, well, we were talking during the break in the chat of the fact that student associations don't always have accessible rooms. And one person wanted to talk about autism. So do you want to take the mic? Do you want to write it down? What do you want to do? I think it was Michelle.
So, Zaréma, can you stop the screen sharing for a moment so everyone can see Michelle?
Yeah, okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Perfect. Can everyone see both Michelle and the interpreter?
You see clearly? I can see,
yeah.
Yes, and you can hear the interpreter?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
Really, I'll just give you a short summary, and I can send you a link later that explains more what autism signifies. But really, in a nutshell, it is very similar to disability ableism. Autism is where people judge you based on your ability to hear or talk. So deaf people hard of hearing people are oppressed because they're not able to hear or speak. That's called autism. It's a new word that's been coined recently and has started to be spread around maybe in the last 6, 7, maybe even 8 years now. I don't know. It could be up to 10 years by this time that we started using this word to identify that kind of problem. And it actually came up first in 1975, but it really hadn't been picked up. But now it's being used more mainstream, and we're realizing that we do have ableism and we have autism out within the society, and that they're really intertwined. So that's all.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And like, I'm so happy that you brought it up because, yeah, I know a lot about ableism, but autism is something that we hear a little bit less about. Like you said, it was like the term existed so long ago, but it wasn't picked up. It's starting to be picked up more. I'm very happy about that. So I'm so happy that you get to talk about it here and include it in this presentation. So I'm really, thank you. Okay, so let's go to the next one because yeah, we are late on schedule and yeah. So, okay, so we were talking about online classes. Because we were talking about them earlier on, I'm gonna skip the little discussion part on it, but what I want to say is that it's difficult for some, like the person was saying, you need to find new accommodations. Not all programs or websites are accessible. But it can be also easier for others. Like, for example, people who need to stay at home to be able to learn. You don't have the hassle of adapted transportation. Also, some people, they prefer not having to socialize with their classmates. I was very surprised because I am a very social person, but the fact of having to go to a class where 50 people are talking at the same time, I can't understand what people are saying. It was very stressful. And once I switched to online classes, I realized how big of a stress it was on my shoulders. So I love the fact that like when it's class, I could focus on class, and when it's time to socialize, I could socialize with other people on the internet, of course, because of our current situation. So I was very surprised of that. And you could also easily leave a class and watch class recordings later. So I thought that was like really nice for me. But of course, in-person instruction is very like, it's very beneficial also. It's a different atmosphere. So yeah, people are writing in the chat. I'm just gonna, what PowerPoint slide are we at? I can't see the number of my PowerPoint slide, but if ever you want me to send the PowerPoints, I have my email at the end. I could send my PowerPoints like this, like if ever you want to go over again, you can. So, okay, there's something in the Q&A. Okay, Zaréma and others, have you had any profs who were using universal design for learning strategies in a consistent way? I don't think so. I don't know. No, sadly. It took me a long time to figure out what it was autism and not autism that we were talking about. I was super confused. Oh yeah, okay. So when Michelle was explaining is autism, probably I'm not saying it very clearly, autism. So no, we're not talking about persons on the autism spectrum right now. So yeah, okay. So let's go to the next slide. So now we're gonna talk about intersectionality. Has anybody heard the concept of intersectionality, and does somebody want to talk about it? I'm gonna look at the time. I hate time, it pressures us. We're kind of a slave to time sometimes. I don't like it. Somebody in the chat, okay.
And I could comment if you wanted.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna pin.
Zaréma, can you stop the screen share so we can see Michelle?
Yeah.
When you design for intersectionality, this is for the interpreter, is going to be like this. And in terms of intersectionality, there's different identities that maybe come together. Like, for example, with my identity, queer, disabled, deaf, gender neutral. So any of these identities are overlapped. So for me, intersectionality, my life experience has been through layering of these different identities. So that would be what I could offer. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's good that you're talking about those identities. That's exactly where I wanted to go. So thank you. So we're gonna hear Kimberly Crenshaw talk about intersectionality. Like this, you could hear it in other words, other ways of saying. So I'm gonna share a video of Kimberly Crenshaw talking about it. Oh wait, I just wanna make sure, is the sound on? Because what is the point of having a video if there is no sound? Okay, so here you go.
Does it happen to have captions that are good that you could turn on that are accurate?
Yeah, I'm gonna put on the captions. Thank you for reminding me, I was going to forget. Okay, so let me know if something's wrong with the video or anything.
Intersectionality is just a metaphor for understanding the ways that multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves, and they create obstacles that often are not understood within conventional ways of thinking about anti-racism or feminism or whatever social justice advocacy structures we have. Intersectionality isn't so much a grand theory, it's a prism for understanding certain kinds of problems. African American girls are 6 times more likely to be suspended than white girls. That's probably a race and a gender problem. It's not just a race problem, it's not just a gender problem. So I encourage people to think about how the convergence of race stereotypes or gender stereotypes might actually play out in the classroom, between teachers and students, between students and other students, between students and administrators, and commit themselves to understanding that as a way of intervening and providing equal educational opportunity for all students, regardless of their identities. Identity isn't simply a self-contained unit. It is a relationship between people in history, people in communities, people in institutions. So schools do a good job when they understand that and when they commit themselves to curricular development, to opportunities in the school for all students to understand the histories that have brought us to this particular moment. You can't change outcomes without understanding how they've come about. So independent schools can take the lead on that to be responsive to their student populations and to the communities out of which the students come.
Okay, so now I'm gonna go back. I'm just gonna check the chat. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to my PowerPoint. So that was Kimberly talking about intersectionality in the example of independent schools. So we're not talking about only independent schools, but yeah, I thought it was a good definition and example in the context of education when she was talking about girls and racism at the same time, how that intersects together. So I'm just gonna say it in other words. So intersectionality is a situation where a person faces simultaneous forms of domination, oppression, and discrimination. So your identity could be, in intersectionality could be influenced by race, gender identity, class, sexual orientation, disability, nationality, age, immigration status, aboriginality, etc. There's a bunch of things. So I'm going to give an example. In universities, women have a higher risk of experiencing sexual violences, sadly. But the risk is even worse when it comes to women with disabilities, women with health problems, students studying abroad, and women in the LGBTQ+ community. So, for example, the fact that you are a woman, you are more likely of experiencing sexual violences. But if you're also LGBTQ+ at the same time, it makes it even worse. Or in this case, if you are a student who is a woman with a disability. And intersectionality could be a bunch of things. You could be a person of color who is trans, you could be a person with a disability who is queer and indigenous. There's a bunch of things that can mix together and make intersectionality. So I have a question for all of you. Do you feel intersectionality plays a role in the obstacles you face in education? So I'm gonna wait for the chat. I'm also gonna go to the next slide because the next slide shows examples of women with disabilities in education. Oh yeah, I also want to not push this slide, and I want to address this slide. If ever you want to learn more about intersectionality, you could look at these authors, because I'm very good with intersectionality when it comes to women with disabilities, but I want you to know there are so many different aspects to it, and I'm not going to cover a lot of it, where I'm just going to go briefly on it. So if ever you want to learn more, you could go to these people. So yeah. Okay, well, because we're still on the topic of intersectionality, I'm gonna start by talking about my slide, but if ever you wanna add in, I'll look at what you're adding in. So I'm gonna give the example of being a woman with a disability in education. So I'm gonna talk about very explicit, easily seen examples, but I want you to know intersectionality is so implicit, you can't point it from the finger and say, this is the problem with intersectionality on this case, and so it's very difficult. So this is examples for you to understand, but it's really unseen often most of the time. So yeah. So for example, we were talking about students who are more likely to experience sexual violences when they are a woman with a disability. Well, 80% of women with disabilities experience violence. So this is a lot. And there's even some studies that go all the way to 90%. So yeah, it's a lot and it's really problematic. Also, a lot of students with disabilities need accommodation. So imagine if you end up being pregnant, or if you're a parent caring for your child, you need more accommodations. It could be difficult. Also, this is a problem for cis women out there. 5 to 10% of women in childbearing age have endometriosis. Endometriosis is when your menstrual pain is so bad that you have to stay home. So if you were already absent due to your disability and due to appointments or whatever regarding that, well, you have to be absent also because you're a cis woman. So yeah, so that's another example. There's also man interrupting and mansplaining. So yeah, these are like two terms that the feminist movement found. Man interrupting is when a man interrupts you because he believes that what you're saying is not as important because you're a woman. And mansplaining is when a man is explaining something to you because he assumes you don't know because you're a woman. So already this is frustrating for me because on the basis that I'm a woman, but it's also frustrating for me because I have a language impairment. So it's difficult for me to find my sentences, be able to tell them, and then after you interrupt me, this is very frustrating. So this is like an explicit example of intersectionality. So yeah, I'm gonna check the chat quick. Okay. So I'm gonna check also the time. Okay, so I have 10 minutes. So, but it doesn't matter if we don't see all the content. I could send you my slides. I prefer we actually go to the content at everybody's pace and we actually get to talk about it. So if ever there's content we don't have time to go over, you could ask for my slides, I don't mind. So now we're going to talk about defending your rights, because that has happened, and as we talked earlier, that happened to other people in this conference. So yeah, so often you need to go back and forth between many services when you want to defend your rights, because you keep being referred to so many people. So yeah, so it takes a lot of your time because you go always from one office to the other. It's difficult to organize. And for those who can't necessarily take an afternoon and walk to all these different offices downtown, it's even harder. So the fact that you often feel like you're a ball going from one place to the other nonstop is very difficult. Also, you need to know your rights, and let's be honest, rights and textbooks with laws and everything are very difficult to read. It's a high level of a language, it's university level. Not everybody has facilities reading this, and so when you have difficulties understanding these rights because it's so difficult to understand, well, then often you go to somebody else who understands them easily and who could explain you and everything. But that is still a little stressful because you're putting your situation in the hands of a person. When you don't exactly understand all the rights that go into that situation, you don't exactly understand what's going to happen with this. It's very scary going to another person and giving your situation that is such a personal one. And also, you need to talk about your situation over and over and over and over. And for those who can't see, I just wrote over and over until you can't see it anymore, just to give you a visual representation that you talk about your situation so many times. And so it's very exhausting because these situations are not these situations are not something that are emotionless. You're very emotionally attached to them. So it's very difficult on an emotional basis to always talk about them. And also you have to talk about them. So when you have a language impairment like me, or when you have a disability that affects talking, like for example, the deaf community, if they don't have an interpreter, what are they gonna do? So it's very difficult. So not everybody is always able to talk about their situation to get the help when it comes to defending their rights. So has this happened to you? Did you need to defend your rights when it comes to your education? How was it, and what worked for you, or what didn't work for you? So I'm gonna check the chat real quick. Yeah, I'm gonna email the PowerPoint to anybody who wants that. So yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay, so I think that we're talking about intersectionality. Sorry, I didn't check the Q&A often enough, I think. Would a woman who had issues with substance abuse be considered part of that too? Yeah, I think so, because we have a lot of judgment towards people who use substances. So yeah, not every school or university has a harm reduction policy. So I think that happens in it. So if you are a woman with a disability who uses an illegal or legal substance and you're being judged on that or discriminated on that.
I'm just having a trouble making sure that everyone can see the interpreter and the slides.
So yeah, and somebody's asking like if alcohol abuse would be another thing. Yeah, I consider that part of intersectionality. Yeah, somebody's saying I'm gonna be reminded to send the PowerPoint, so that's not a problem. So yeah, okay. So if ever somebody wants to talk about rights, you could write it down. I'm gonna go to the next slide and I'm gonna read it. Okay, I have 5 minutes. Okay, also if you have questions, you could also ask questions because we might not have time at the end. So, okay, so now we're gonna talk about how to be an ally. So I want you to ask, when it comes to able-bodied students, able-bodied means somebody who doesn't have a disability. When it comes to able-bodied students, how can they become allies? And to make us think, I gave examples of other forms of allyship. So for example, if I'm a local student from Montreal, I could help a student studying abroad with the local language. Like for example, we know our metro in Montreal is French, and I speak perfect French. So somebody who can't speak French, I could help that student out. That's a good example. Also, I could speak out and denounce my white privilege. So whenever I see white privilege, I don't stay silent about it. I talk about it, and that's my good way of being an ally. So that's a good example. Also, men who wants to go to feminist protests and encourage the movement, that's amazing, but it's even more amazing when these men don't take up all the space. They let women in the front, they let the women lead the protest, and they are right behind them supporting the movement, which is amazing. So these are good examples of allyship. So I want us to think, what can we do to be an ally for students with disabilities? I'm gonna wait for people to type. And also, if ever you need inspiration, if you're a student with a disability, what has able-bodied students done that helped you a lot? And if you're an able-bodied student who's listening right now, what do you think you could do to change ableism in education? So yeah, okay. If you see a teacher not respecting accommodations, take the side of the student and say something. Yeah, especially for students who have difficulties like talking or who don't like confrontation, it's very helpful when an able-bodied student is at their side and confronting together the professor or teacher. Okay, listen to, oh yeah, give some of your time to listen and support advocacy. Yes, so you could like Facebook page about anti-ableism advocacy. You could also take time to talk about it for with students with disabilities or with able-bodied students. Just talk about it. It's amazing. Learning your friends' needs and wants. Yeah, communication, talking about it with the student who has a disability. Hey, what do you need from me for me to help you? I want to be an ally. What can I do? That's amazing. Speak up, report it to your administration for students associations. Yes, because not everybody has the ability to speak up necessarily, and it's very complicated. If you are able to speak up and report things easily, do it, because not everybody is able to. These are good examples. I love it. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go to the next slide. I talked about it. Oh, and you can keep typing your answers if you have answers again. So yeah, so I was talking about it with my friends, and we found a few things to be an ally in our opinion. So I talked about communication. That's a key. Ask if the person needs help instead of imposing your help. So if somebody doesn't want help, it's okay. You asked, don't pressure it. Let the person explain how they can be helped. There's a way to guide somebody who can't see. Don't necessarily pull the person's arm, don't necessarily push that person, and you're not expected to know how to guide a person who can't see, for example, but that person can explain you how to be guided, how their mobility aid works, how to re-explain something for them to understand. Ask if the person is comfortable disclosing their disability before talking about their disability. Some people, they're really comfortable with it. They want us to talk about ableism. They want us to talk about their disability. And some people, they really don't want to live ableism. They really don't want the assumptions with it. They just want people not to address it. And I think most people are somewhere in between. So before talking about somebody's disability, make sure with the person, are you comfortable with that or are you not? Offer your services. If you could be a note taker, if you could guide somebody to the next class, if it doesn't take much of your time, it's not that hard for you and you can do it, do it. It just helps. Mention the student's strengths. Don't always victimize. Every person has weaknesses and strengths. If the only time you're talking about the person with a disability is to talk about how difficult their life is, you're doing something wrong. The person has strengths and weaknesses. You would talk about both of these things to pretty much everyone. So do that when you talk about the person with a disability. I'm gonna check the Q&A. Note-taking is important and is usually a service paid by the disability services. Not everywhere though. I know McGill doesn't pay their note-taking services, but yeah, in Cégep du Vieux-Montréal they do, and I think all CEGEPs do. So yeah, I'm gonna look at the chat just in case. Respecting someone's autonomy and rhythm while you're helping them. Yes, if you want to help somebody and they are going slower than you would like, accept it. Accept it. Don't be in a hurry. So yeah. Okay. So I'm just gonna go quickly. I'm so sorry if we don't have time to continue. I'm just gonna go quickly throughout the slides for you to see like the titles. And anyways, I'm gonna send you the slides if ever you wanted to see like more than just the titles. So also another way to be an ally, include students with disabilities. Speak out. We were talking about speaking out, doing formal complaints, or if you don't want to do any formal complaint, or if you don't want to do anything direct, just talk about ableism to your friends, to your professors, to your student associations. Just talking about ableism makes a difference on the long run, because often we talk about racism, sexism, homophobia, but in schools we never talk about ableism. So start the discussion. Start it. So yeah. So I had like questions for discussions, but sadly we don't have time for those. But like, I think it's amazing because you guys participated earlier. So yeah, so these are, this is my email. If ever you want to email me, it's zaréma.bulgak@outlook.com. And there's resources. You could go to ACEPS. They do a lot of advocacy for students with disabilities. And you could go to Action des Femmes Handicapées Montréal if you're a woman who has a disability, you want to do feminist advocacy, you want to do anti-ableism, you could become a member, and we are also, we could also serve you in English, so don't be intimidated by the Francophone name. So yeah, if you don't want to do any advocacy, but you just want to talk, there's McGill Student Nightline, there's Concordia Student Nightline, and there's also different nightlines depending on the university you're at. And if you need another resource, you could dial 211, explain your situation, and they're gonna give you other resources. So yeah. Now there's the chat. So yeah, what do you mean by that? Femme folks who are, can you specify what you mean by that, Edgar? Or, oh, who are non-binary. Are you talking about, what are you talking about exactly? Are you talking about when we were talking about intersectionality, or? Oh, Adai Fashem. That's a really good question. I'm personally really for it, and we just talked about it in our teams. So of course there's all a protocol that we have to do before implementing it, but I think it's gonna happen because I'm really for it. A lot of people are for it. It's just a question of time before us implementing it. So yeah, I'm gonna go. Oh yeah, somebody was talking, don't touch their mobility aid. Yeah, when we're talking of allyship, yeah, probably you're curious and everything, but don't touch your mobility aid. That's a good example. So yeah, okay, perfect. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna leave the next presenter starting to present, and I'm gonna come to the next presentation as an attendee. So if ever you have questions and you wanna write them on the chat, you can just write them privately to me. I don't know if it's possible. I think so. Yeah. So if you can write the questions privately to me, and I'm also gonna retype my